awesome. Bye. All right.
Let's do it again.
Here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of Being High with Dualistic Unity. Today we have a fucking awesome guest. Her name is Nicole DiMascio. I really hope I'm saying that correctly, Nicole. Forgive me if I am not. Nicole is a awesome content creator. She posts on TikTok, on Instagram. She makes videos just being herself. She does a cooking show, but really it's just being herself. And I've noticed more recently that she's sharing a lot more of her life, which is fucking awesome. And I resonate with a ton.
Yeah, this episode is dope. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm looking forward to having Nicole on the show again at some point in the near future, because this wasn't just about getting high, and it wasn't just about cooking, and it wasn't just about eating, though there was a little bit of discussion about what is good to eat when you're high. So definitely stay tuned for that. But there was a lot in this episode about just being human, about putting yourself out there, about making your own trail, about the uncertainty that goes with that, the need to have faith in yourself, and even the need to take some time so you can find yourself again when you start to get too carried away in the path that you have chosen and you forget why you chose that path. This conversation was fantastic, and I'm really excited to share it with our listeners.
And if you would like to find Nicole on social media, she is dope__kitchen on Instagram. That's 2 underscores on Instagram, and dope_kitchen on TikTok. She's fucking great, and you should check her out. And I'll stop talking now so you can enjoy the conversation.
And we recorded that one.
Nice.
We're more or less just going to go from here, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, cool. Should I be smoking at all or consuming any
Yes.
cannabis?
We both just smoked. Well, I just smoked a good sized joint, and I don't know what he did, but he's high too. We're very high. Yes.
I love that it's during it. Yeah.
It's a tiny little guy too, so it'll get me a nice little buzz without getting too stoned. You know what I mean?
I do. I appreciate it for sure. That's one thing I like about smoking, is that it's a little bit more controllable that way.
Yeah.
It's like, how high can I get for how long?
I did I don't remember when it was, probably like a month or so ago. I had 2 10-milligram gummies, and I'm not usually that much of a lightweight, but I did take a bit of a tolerance break in September. I took like 3 or 4 weeks off of smoking or consuming any sort of cannabis, and I had that paranoid, stoned feeling. I was like gripping 2 pillows, trying to stay as grounded as possible because I had no idea how far into outer space I was about to be launched. But it was only 20 milligrams, which seems like such a light dosage, but hits us all differently.
And again, it may not even be that. Sometimes it's the mentality you're in, or the stress level, or half the crap that's going on behind the scenes. You know, I was having this conversation with somebody on our free weekly group chat yesterday, and they were saying, like, I smoked a strong indica, and I just couldn't stop thinking. Like, I just kept taking things in, and now I can't stop thinking. Like, I like when I'm around people, I'm aware of when I'm tuning them out. I'm like, isn't that better than not being aware when you were tuning them out? Like, maybe you were just waiting for the time to have that lesson, and you finally relaxed enough that it hit.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
I feel like every day. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, your state of being like has such a massive impact on the response to cannabis. Like I've mentioned it a number of times on the podcast, but I find it very funny how I just smoke more weed in general now, but also like take gummies and edibles and stuff. Cause like, you know, when I was in college, I was way more tense, like way less relaxed in a lot of ways. And I had 2 experiences specifically, that feeling that you were kind of describing of like holding on, trying to stay grounded, like resisting that feeling of like floating away, almost like being so high just from being relaxed, that I would throw up. Like I would get pale in the face, go green in the face, throw up, be like, you know, writhing in like in a fetal position sometimes. And it's like, it's funny to admit that, but it was just because I was so tense, but I had no grasp of like where that was coming from necessarily. And whereas now, you know, I get really high, it's not that the feelings are that much different. Like the feeling of being high, it's just like my response to it has shifted.
Yeah. And I have this conversation with a lot of people about like different strains and how they affect you or how they make you feel. My argument is that it's all kind of bullshit because it's all going to feel differently to each individual person. And it's also going to feel differently depending on what state of mind I'm in or what physical state I might be in. You know, the same strain, if I smoke it in the morning, is going to feel different in the evening. And it's going to feel different if I'm really happy, and it's going to feel different if I'm really sad. So it's very interesting to think about like all of these categories we try to put cannabis in and all of these labels we try to stick on it, when to me, it really just depends on your own body and your own experience in that present moment.
Absolutely agree. It's funny. I have this conversation with people often, and I have said, and I don't make a lot of friends this way, but responsibility is not nearly as frightening as you might think. Like being able to take in that you have an impact on your high, you have an impact on the state of being, you have an impact even on a bad trip. You know, a lot of that bad trip. Why is it a bad trip? Because you don't like it. That's why it's a bad trip,
Mm.
right? And it's just funny that we can forget that and discount that. Nicole, I would love to know more about Dope Kitchen. I would love to know where it came from and how long you've been doing it. I love it. I love cooking when I'm high. I love eating when I'm high. I love being high as a whole. But I love the fact that you are doing this like as a lifestyle. This is great, and you're sharing
Yeah.
it with people, and you're normalizing it, and you're having a great fucking time doing it. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, it all started as an accident. I started maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the pandemic. And what happened was I was living in a small studio apartment, so I had no roommates to interact with when we were in the safer at home lockdown. And people weren't really leaving their house, friends weren't mingling with each other outside of their homes. So I was so lonely after spending like 2 weeks by myself and not really seeing any other human beings. So I was feeling really depressed and I was just laying in bed doing nothing. I would work from my bed every day, and I just got sick of it because it became very clear to me that there was going to be no end in sight with this whole lockdown pandemic thing. So I had to kind of force myself to find a way to get out of bed. And for me, it often means like doing something really creative. I love to cook and I love to bake, even though I'm not very good at baking. So I just decided to get out of bed and I baked a pie that was kind of nostalgic and reminded me of home. It was a ricotta pie, and my grandma made it around that time of year every year. So I just baked that pie, but I got stoned while doing it, and I recorded myself because I don't know, I was bored and I felt like without human interaction for a couple weeks, I just needed to talk to someone, even if it was just a camera. And I posted it to my personal Instagram story, my silly high cooking video. And my friends were like, "You should post this to TikTok. This is really cute and really funny." And I said, "No, that's weird. TikTok is full of like 13-year-old girls dancing. I don't want to post my, recreational drug use on the internet." But then I did, and when I posted the video, I just closed the app and didn't go back to the app for a few hours. And a few hours later, I opened the app and had something like 18,000 views on my video, which isn't a lot, but it was enough for people to notice it and comment like, "I need more of this. This is really funny. Make this a series." So I just had plenty of free time during the pandemic. So I just kept making a few videos, and it was a lot of fun for a couple weeks. And then I took a break from it. And a couple months later, I got back to it and I posted a video that made me go from about 20,000 followers to 100,000 followers in a week. And it was at that point where I was like, I think I should probably tell my family what this is and what's going on, because 100,000 people watching me on the internet is kind of crazy. And my family should know about it. So I told my family about it, and my friends were encouraging me to keep going with it and making more videos and turning it into a bigger brand. So I just had fun with it and I ran with it and kept going, and I've had so much fun since that first video at the start of the pandemic, and now it's been, I guess, almost 4 years in April.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's inspiring. I've been doing this podcast here for about 2 years, and I did social media for a short bit before that, but I relatively, mostly keep to myself. My daughter's the one that was responsible for me getting onto TikTok, and ultimately why I met Andrew through those videos and whatnot. But I love the fact that you just did it because you were having fun and it exploded. And so how much has that process changed for you now, 4 years later, instead of just like, fuck it, I'm just going to do a video? Is it still that? Or is there more production value that goes into it?
There's not as much production as I would like. I was able to quit my job about a little over a year ago to pursue Dope Kitchen full time, but it turned into more of a year of self-care as opposed to a year of working on this brand that I wanted to build, which was actually really important for me. And I'm very grateful that I kind of took a little bit of a step back from making content and working and just focused on myself for a year. A lot of personal growth has come from this year. And I feel really grateful to have had the opportunity and the time. But usually when I do record my videos, it is still kind of like me having fun, because I think that's where the authenticity comes from. I can't like schedule my filming into my week. I loosely schedule it, but if something happens that kind of puts me in a bad mood, that's going to come through in my videos. So I am very flexible with myself. And if something happens on Tuesday and I was supposed to film Tuesday, I say, fuck it, I'll film Wednesday or Thursday when I'm in a little bit of a better mindset. Because if I'm not feeling great mentally in my videos, you can tell, and it's just not as fun, feels very forced, and it's just not as funny. And I try to be funny on the internet. So yeah.
That's awesome. I resonate with that a ton because how much like when you're trying to, or even if you started thinking about like, the right way to make a dope kitchen cooking video, it wouldn't have like that same degree of authenticity and like it wouldn't be relaxed in the same way. And I find I love watching your videos because you reflect that state of relaxation. Like it looks like you're having fun doing it. And so like I'm having fun watching it because like I'm also relatively relaxed. And I've noticed that in my content, like over a very similar sort of like situation in a lot of ways. And I've been posting since mid 2020. And it was, just something I felt like I wanted to do for a while and then got into it. Had some friends push me and like, hey, have you made this thing like this? Have you checked out TikTok yet? Threw that on first. Or it was like technically second video. First video was actually a cooking video. It's kind of funny. And so my second one then just like was one of those things, closed the app and then got a call from my sister that was like, Andrew, your videos like blowing up. And then it was like, okay, maybe I'll turn this into something. So it's been a very much a journey for me in relaxation, I think, in a lot of ways, and in being myself and being more willing to be myself. And I've found that I have been more willing as I've been more willing to be myself. Like cannabis is a very relatively new thing for me, and it's something that I was super uncomfortable with for a long time. And I think a lot of that was because I was feeling like a gap between like how I was when I was high and like how I thought of myself and because how I thought of myself wasn't me being myself because it was some idea. And a lot of that comes from, growing up in more rigid and controlling environments like we all do at school, but also with just trying to be something. Because as I was doing that, I was not really being myself so much. And so I've found more recently that I post more about cannabis and talk about it because I think it kind of goes hand in hand with being yourself. And like people who have difficult times with it tend to take themselves a lot more seriously and have more rigid ideas of themselves, or they're trying to be something for the world. They don't realize it. They think they're trying to be something for themselves, but it's really like expressed through trying to be something for the world. And so I'm curious in your experience. I know that cannabis is something you tried once, maybe in high school, and then kind of didn't do it for a while in college, and then got back into it, maybe 4 or 5 years ago or so, and do it more formally. I'm curious how your mentality or your willingness to be yourself has kind of been you've gravitated towards or away from cannabis, if you've noticed any patterns in that.
Yeah, it's kind of um maybe the opposite experience of yours where I felt like I was trying to be someone that I'm not while I'm totally sober. Or even like when I was drinking alcohol, I felt like I was trying to be someone that I wasn't. And when I smoked weed, I felt like I was able to relax into the person that I actually was. Um, And I felt like I could have more fun without judging myself or without judging others. And that's kind of just what cannabis brought to me, was the ability to actually connect with myself a little bit more authentically and to allow myself to show that to the rest of the world. Um, I I feel like Dope Kitchen also helped me get a lot more comfortable with cannabis use, and I feel like it's because I've been allowed to, like, break the stigma of what it means to be a pot smoker or a stoner, whatever you wanna call yourself. I'm not someone who smokes pot all day, every day. Some days I don't consume weed at all, and sometimes I go a week or so without it because I feel like I don't need it. But I still feel like I have the right to call myself a stoner, and you don't need to fit a certain stereotype in order to be a cannabis user. You can be a successful, adventurous, athletic, like passionate, um, active person, and you don't have to be a lazy person who like eats junk food and like sits on the couch playing games all day, you know? So anyway, I feel like I learned to become myself by getting more comfortable with cannabis.
That's awesome. It's funny because it's kind of the same lesson with being a social media creator. Right? Like
Mhm,
you're jumping in, and in doing so, you're learning to be yourself a bit more. Like not only are you getting more comfortable with cannabis, you're getting more comfortable with talking to an audience, and thus more comfortable with yourself.
mhm.
Which leads me to the question about personal growth. You were mentioning that you went through a period of personal growth, and I love that because so often we get kind of tunnel vision towards what we think we want our dream to be, and then we get there and we don't enjoy it, and it's because we've stressed ourselves to a point where we can't enjoy it. We don't even remember why we wanted it. We're like, we're here, but this sucks. And so
Mhm.
I love the fact that you took that gap, or rather that break, just easing off a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I first quit my job in October, I felt like I had this immediate sense of panic, like, "Oh my god, what did I just do? Do I even want to be a creator full time? Is this the right move? Like, what if it all comes crashing down tomorrow?" Because it is risky being a cannabis creator on platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Um, so I was just absolutely terrified, and I realized that I had just been working my ass off for years. Like I had a full-time job on top of making content, like spending at least 20 hours a week on making content. On top of my like 50-hour a week job, I was just fucking tired, and I had lost interest in all of my hobbies. I used to be like super into weightlifting. I used to be way more outdoorsy than I am now. I just stopped doing a lot of my hobbies, and I felt like I completely lost myself by being kind of a workaholic and like living my life as this caricature of myself on the internet. So I actually did some acid last December, and that kind of forced me on this path of like taking a step back to focus on myself. That acid trip just made me realize that like, life is so fucking beautiful on acid. I'm sure you both have some experience maybe. Um, and it's just so fun, so beautiful. You just notice the little things that bring so much joy to your life. And when it was over, I was sad for a couple of days, and I was thinking, like, how can I bring that sense of joy back to every day? And I realized it was through habit changes. And through habit changes, I started therapy with a new therapist. And she got me into EMDR therapy, which is a really difficult but totally worth it trauma healing experience. And because of like some breakthroughs that I had on therapy, I just kind of realized that I needed to take some time to like really get to know myself more, find new hobbies, meet new people, travel more because I've never had the opportunity to travel in my life until like last year. Um, and yeah, I've learned so much about myself through the process of going to therapy, the process of, you know, traveling around the world and meeting new people. There This is a whole 'nother story that would take forever to explain, but I've connected more with my sexuality this year because I felt like that has been something that I have stopped myself from exploring for most of my life, and I've used work and working too much as an excuse to not date and not explore who I was. And that has completely changed for me this year. I feel like I'm getting emotional. Today was a therapy day, so lots of crying. Um, but yeah, I just feel like I had lost sense of who I was because of how much I was working and making content, that I just needed to take a little bit of a step back while still doing enough to pay the bills and put food on the table. But I am so incredibly grateful for this year because I feel like I really got to know who I was and who I wanted to be. Um, and it feels really nice to meet who that person is.
Well, it is in fact very nice to meet who that person is. I'm glad to have you on the show. It is so incredibly important to remember that sometimes the pace can get addictive. We can get so caught up in what we've been doing that we're doing really well, like, oh my God, this is going really well. And then all of a sudden we forget that, right, there's a reason that we were doing this though, right? Living, being
Mhm.
here in the moment, our relationship with ourself. And so that's fantastic. I love it. I love the traveling, especially, I think, because to me traveling is so symbolic of the importance of change, of accepting change and uncertainty. Like, why does traveling feel so good? Because you plunge into uncertainty willingly, and then you make the most of it as you're doing it. But then we get home and we convince ourselves that we actually know what's going to happen next, even though it's still uncertainty. It just looks
Mhm.
familiar, right? So you can take a lot of lessons from traveling in the same way you can take a lot of lessons from getting high.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Again, we've been doing this full time for about a year, and I've gotten some traveling in this year, and have very much felt a similar, I don't know, reflection, and just how there's been discomforts that come with that in a lot of ways too. Like, you realize when you are running and running around and focusing on a bunch of stuff that maybe isn't the most important thing, that you realize when you do a tab of acid or do some mushrooms or just like chill the fuck out. When you're willing to then sit in that more often and like just feel all the things, like, oh my God, there's a lot there. Like, is this a new thing? Am I going backwards in my life? Like, am I retracting my ability to handle and face reality? But it's just because there's so much in the way when you're running around. And it's like, because we're brought up in a system that kind of tells us what to do and like who to be. And we so often see, and I certainly experienced it myself, like, coming out of college when I'm 22, it's like, go, go do. It's like, well, I've been told what to do my whole fucking
Mhm.
life. I don't know what I want to be doing. I don't know what I act like when I'm not being pushed and pulled. And I feel like I'm straight up just realizing that now. And it's been, varied expressions, but especially in my content, like more relaxed in general. And it's interesting how like it'll take, a period of time almost to like post being told how to live. It's like there's a carryover, and a lot of people never, take a second to be like, what do I actually want? And I think cannabis is a thing that can help people sort of not force themselves into that experience, but at least like chill out for a
Yeah.
sec and then see maybe some of the stuff they're missing or avoiding. But a lot of people never take a second till they're, go through a midlife crisis, or till they just never do it. So
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Yeah. Cannabis definitely slows you down a little bit. And I feel like mushrooms or any psychedelic does the same as well. It really forces you to slow down and appreciate what's right in front of you instead of constantly thinking about the future. I think all three of those substances mentioned are things that have helped me a lot. And I really need another mushroom trip soon because I feel like I'm starting to get so freaked out by the pace of life again, kind of like what you mentioned about when you graduate college, there's no path already laid out ahead of you. I remember when I was 22 or 24 when I graduated grad school, I freaked out. I had a bit of an emotional breakdown because it's so scary to think that the first 24 years of my life, there was always an end in sight, like end of middle school, end of high school, end of college, and you know what the next step is right after that end. But after you end all of your academic career, there's no end in sight. You don't know what's gonna automatically happen to you in 4 years as long as you pass your classes, you know? So, it was fucking freaky when I was 24 and I just felt like life was moving too fast. Everyone around me was moving so damn fast, especially in a city like LA and especially in the entertainment industry, which is what I worked in for years before I left. But it's kind of terrifying to feel like life is going so damn fast. And when it felt like I had maybe made some wrong choices in my career after spending so much money on school, it felt even more terrifying to have everything move so fast when I wasn't even sure if I was happy or confident in the path that I had chosen for myself and spent so long building.
It's crazy how much weight goes with that idea that there's a right way. Like just this idea, it's like, come on, get this far. Now just get this far. Now get this far. And then all of a sudden it's like you've been jettisoned into space and there's no direction whatsoever. And you still have all that conditioned responsive, but I'm supposed to try to do the right thing. I'm supposed to try to get to the right place. I'm supposed to try to fit into all of this. And so it's really hard to let that go. And then you find that the pressure is not coming from authority figures, it's not coming from the structure around you, it's coming from you.
Yeah.
Like you've actually learned to police yourself, and it's a rough experience. But on the other hand, and this is something that comforts me because God knows I'd need it after enough time. Without all of that, I wouldn't be where I am.
Mhm.
Right? I wouldn't be able to empathize with people going through it. I wouldn't be able to I guess value and appreciate what I have now, and even just the ability to value and appreciate what I have. I value and appreciate, right? So we change so much just going through that stuff. But on the other hand, it's like, it's kind of exhausting. But that said, we have an underlying theme, I guess, on our podcast, Dualistic Unity. This is a side podcast, if you were, where we just value getting high and talking about cannabis and all that. I think the underlying theme with here is just recognizing that uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing, that the more we embrace uncertainty and have faith in ourselves, not our idea of ourselves, but who we actually are, as you so eloquently put earlier, the more we find ourselves at our best. You know, we're shining, we're responsible, we're aware, we're empathetic, we go through all of that, but it's being willing to go through it, right? It's being willing to just be here in reality and not know where we're going to go. Have kind of a best guess, but not stake everything on it, because I think that was the difference with the past, is that there was so much riding on it. Like
Mhm.
every decision, then when finally you're looking at it like, did I do the right thing? It's terrifying. It's terrifying. So that said, and I know I'm asking a lot. If you were to summarize one of the insights that helps you now, looking back at all that shit, what would it be?
Oh man, what a question. Um, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily an insight, but I like to look back and think about how cool my younger self would think I am now. Um, and how unbelievable my life has become and how my younger self would totally like eat this shit up, you know?
It's a damn good insight.
So that's what
Absolutely.
I guess my insight is to always take a breath to look back and think about how your younger self would view you today. And if you're maybe going through a hard time, maybe imagine your younger self being there to comfort you and be like, it's okay. You've made it through a couple of bad times before. You can do it again. You know, you just kind of have to remember to let your inner child talk to you sometimes.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because and as you're saying that, I'm like, if I had my younger self look at, I wouldn't believe that it was possible in any way. And I'm sure Ray would probably believe something similar. Oh my gosh. Because like, and we forget like with that constant, because I can be hard on myself and very judgmental of myself, and like it's like I always had a bar, but like you're saying with school, like we're kind of it's always a constant bar. Next thing, best thing, next test, study for this, measure yourself. Like we're brought up fucking measuring ourselves constantly and wonder why we judge ourselves so often. It's like because that was how we came into the world. Like once we hit 5 was like awareness of how we're doing with things. And then it gets stripped and it's like we're floating in space, but like, because there isn't someone so often telling us how we should be acting or what we should be doing. So it does just come down to us doing it. And so something that I realized I tried actually LSD for the first time just a couple weeks ago, and it hit me just how much like I'm the one in my way all the time. Like I'm the one, as much as, yeah, there have been people who judge me or look at me funny or whatever, it's still me putting any weight on that or thinking that it means anything, not recognizing, probably where it comes from, the need for someone to judge someone who's being more themselves. And then that kind of narrows us into an experience of like being quote unquote normal, which is the most bullshit thing ever. It's like normal doesn't exist. Like everyone is very much, a unique snowflake in their own way, but like very much so. Like everyone's their own person. And it's crazy to see how similar everyone kind of forces themselves into becoming, and anyone who deviates from that through just being a little bit more relaxed and a little bit less, not less careful but more carefree, like there's almost an aversion to that, and aversion we see being things like judgment or even anger in response. Like I've had people comment because I post more with being just like videos where I'm high, like people have said uh something like you're laughing a lot more. Like I wish you'd just start acting how you used to act, like you laugh way more. Or something along those lines. Basically calling out that I laugh more than I used to, and that's a bad thing. Like I
Okay.
should be more serious. But anyway, it's interesting to and I don't even remember where I started that point, honestly, but it's been very interesting.
Happens to the best of us. You did say something that sparked something in me though. Just like the fact that we've always been measuring ourselves our entire lives, and some people just get so uncomfortable when we enter like the adult world where we have to fend for ourselves, and all of a sudden we don't really have a scale with which to measure certain parts of our lives. I have actually been like thinking about this idea for a while because, as I mentioned again, I quit my job a year ago, and I am at this point where I've been working for myself as a full-time creator for over a year, and I'm just so uncomfortable with it because I don't have someone else kind of measuring my performance or telling me what my tasks are that I need to do. I have to do all of it myself, and that's scary. Like when the earning potential is unlimited, when the follower growth is unlimited almost, or and when like things aren't properly outlined and defined for me, it's fucking scary for me. I love the comfort of being at a corporation where someone is like helping me outline goals, or there's projects that I have to work on that have a very clear like beginning, middle, and end, you know? So I'm now dealing with the, do I go back to work full time for a company, have like my W-2 and my set paycheck and taxes that are already taken out for me, or do I continue like forcing myself through the discomfort of like running a business, um, just so I can continue making content and doing things that I think are really fun on the internet. Um, I don't know. It's the lack of structure for me is kind of scary, and I'm trying so desperately to like cling to little bits of structure in my life because that's what makes me feel comfortable. But the unknown is just so terrifying for me.
And yet it's where you shine. It's where you do your best because you're actually paying attention, because you're actually involved with what you're doing. You're being sensitive to how you feel in terms of your relationship with yourself. And it's just that the path isn't laid out by somebody else. But on the other hand, that means that you can go somewhere that maybe nobody ever has been,
Mhm.
that you can express something and have a ripple that nobody else has expressed, that no other person could possibly express, or anybody else could create that ripple. Like you have this capacity to do something, just you just don't know what it is, right? And that can be terrifying, but you're doing it. You've been doing it this whole time. And what I love about it is that it's not just being a creator. It's not just, doing the business. It's being yourself. It's exactly the same thing. We look to other people like, who should I be? You know, how should I act? What's right? What's wrong? All of this stuff. And meanwhile, it's because we're terrified to just find out ourselves, to be sensitive, to move forward and understand that we're learning all the time, that we're always doing the best that we can. I think it's fantastic, the path that you're on, but just to relate to you, every step of the way with everything that we do is total, complete uncertainty. We've had 8 retreats so far, and we aren't retreat hosts. We actually have retreats with the specific purpose of not being retreat hosts. Like, everybody contributes to the experience. Everybody contributes to the quote unquote retreat. And every time we go through this mad period of insecurity, and then we realize, like, right, just continue on despite the insecurity, and everything works out. But it's always that. It's always, my brain says this is going to go terribly, but if I just keep going, it's never right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just add, like, it's the feeling of kind of like being at the forefront of reality in a sense versus being on a path, like being in a, very much so being in a forest, and like, you know, there's some paths, but there's also some untracked areas. Some of the paths are very, 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 very worn down. Some are a little bit less worn down, but there's nothing saying, and this is just like straight up, we go through this, we're going through the same exact sort of thing with, like, about a year ago, we went full time and have been doing this, whatever this is, for that period of time, and every step of the way, it's like that has been a huge thing. I know Ray's worked on his own companies in the past, but like that's been something I've gotten more and more, and even just with the like more and more relaxed about, is how little I know what the right thing to do is. Like, even, you know, a podcast like this, like we don't really come to these with prep. We like get high and don't show up with a plan necessarily, and it's just like see where it goes. Like a couple questions in the back pocket maybe, but like there was a point in my life where being high, number one, just by myself was like too intense. Being high and being recorded was like would have been not a thing at all. Being and
Hard.
like and then showing up without like a plan necessarily is like, Jesus fucking Christ, like what the fuck are you doing, dude? You're like
Yeah.
setting yourself up for failure. Because I have this assumption that there's a way to fail as opposed to just being myself. And if relaxing allows me to be myself, then like if I can relax in the face of those things as they arise, then it'll continue playing out more or less kind of seamlessly. It doesn't mean there's going to be not going to be bumps in the road or things going on, but like I think remembering that you're doing something new, like brand new, like entirely brand new, and it's being yourself is like the most exciting thing. And that's something I'm coming closer and closer to realizing too, is like that's fucking incredible, especially in a world that's like, you know, everyone's following the very, very tracked paths, and there isn't so much of a draw to, you know, stepping out in the forest where there isn't so much of
Yeah. When you kind of step off of the beaten path and forge your own, you have to have a lot of trust in yourself. And that's something that's been hard for me personally to develop. But it's hard to learn to trust yourself. You have to get like the little things right first before you can trust yourself with bigger things. And sometimes, you know, I keep pushing off those little things so that I'm not building trust in myself the way that I should, you know? So it's a very hard skill to have, is learning how to trust yourself.
I think it helps to remember that you can trust yourself to fail, that you can
Mhm.
trust yourself to stumble and fall and learn from it, and stumble and fall and learn from it, and each and every time you get better and better at what you're doing. In the same way that any corporation, any industry that you get into right now that's well established, somebody at some point went down that path and didn't know what the hell that they were doing, and now that path is well laid, and so we can follow it. But you're on a path that's not, and you don't know where it goes. And that's one thing I wanted to bring up, was it's so important to remember that even in our own path, that we have no idea where this is going. Like, it's so easy to go, well, what am I going to do, this channel forever? No. I mean, you're going to learn from it, you're going to change. Maybe other people are going to be inspired by you. You might be the part of a growing industry. Just so happens you are in fact part of an exploding industry and mentality that's so fundamental. So You have no idea. 2 years from now, you could be getting phone calls to be a consultant on other similar shows. You could be talking to people about creating other things and take a different path entirely. But the nice thing about the journey that you're on is that you can define that. Right? You're the one that can say, I'm going to pivot here with everything that I've learned, because it's your path. And although that's damned uncomfortable, life is very uncomfortable, especially when you're really, living right in the uncertainty. It's kind of like there's no certainty, or flight and risk go hand in hand.
I feel like the fear of uncertainty and the not really knowing where my career or my life is going, that is the idea that scares me into thinking that I want to run back to something that is familiar and comfortable, which is a full-time corporate job. But I think about this so often.
Likewise. And I say that after being an entrepreneur for 15 years. It's always very tempting. And at one point I did, because I had to change my situation. My wife had gotten a practicum placement in another city, and I was self-employed. All my clients were local. I'm like, oh my God. So you have to transition. But then you go into that position, you remember, right, there were limitations to this. Not just limitations, but there were always the people you worked for and around, and the fact that they would bring their stuff with them to work, and it wasn't always your vision. You didn't always agree with what you were doing. You didn't always like how it was done. Like, there are limitations as much as there was certainty. There is nothing more certain than a prison, right? You know exactly what's going to happen day to day. Nothing.
And I think realizing too, for me at least, that going back to a role like that or a more corporate thing is like how that plays out is just as uncertain as how this plays out. But it's just kind of like Ray, you were saying, it's just not as much, or it seems like it's not as much on me, but like it still is. There's just less ability to do something about it. Like when it's you doing your thing, being yourself, kind of more or less on your own or in an entrepreneurial role, it's like shit comes up and happens, but it stems from you. And so there's that faith built in yourself via that, versus in a more corporate role, maybe like there's still just as much shit going haywire, but like you have less sort of sway over. It's still your response to it, but it's, in a sense, there's more, like you're passing off a feeling of influence for the sense of control. And like how often there would be things maybe or suggestions I would have at my old job where like I wanted something to go a little bit differently and there was just no way, or there wasn't even like, just knowing that the things that I didn't necessarily have that much sway. It has some sway over the bottom line. Like the variations aren't as extreme. And so it's just that trade-off of like freedom versus a lack of freedom. And it is like, being in a prison cell versus recognizing the gate's open, but like you don't know what's out there. And so you can stay in that and kind of know it, or go and explore a little and find out. But yeah, I guess it really just comes down to us. Like there's not a right or a wrong to that either.
No, ever. And that's the beautiful part about uncertainty. And this is something that has taken me forever to learn, because that recognition of the fact that we just don't know what's coming, we never know what's coming, is something that terrified me for years. And then I recognized that it was only when I stopped to think about it. It was only when I stopped and I looked forward and I went, oh my God, it could be all of these things. And it's always the stuff I'm afraid of. Right? My brain's not ever creating things I'm not afraid of when I'm looking forward. It's always giving me lots of things that could possibly happen that I don't know if I can deal with. But that's been doing that the whole time, and I've never been in control, and I'm still doing just fine. And so I really just try to come back to that I can project into the future, but I don't know any more than I can know who I am right now in a conceptual sense. Like if you were to say, all right, tell me who you are, everything I answer isn't me. Right? It might be stuff I do, but it's not who I am. Right? Who I am is who I am right now. And so being in that state of who you are right now is just trusting yourself, just moving forward, right? So I guess the point is, and this is the lovely part about all this, is it doesn't matter what you do. Even if you went back to work or you didn't go back to work, you're still being you. It's just the environment's changed. It's like, now I'm going to rattle the walls inside a corporation. Instead, you may not be able to cook, but you can do something else and inspire people in a different way. Which leads me to my next question, because of course, you've been doing this for 4 years. The comments from people, I'm sure they skew on both sides, but on the supportive side, how does it feel to know that there are people out there that are actually inspired by how open you are about this part of your life? Not only cannabis, but cooking and being on social media. Like, I'm sure that you get lots of messages from people just saying, thank you so much for being out here. Thank you for making my day brighter. Thank you for having the courage to do this. That must have an impact.
Yeah, it's part of what has really helped me find my confidence. Um, just being myself and then having people recognize that who I am is someone who can bring joy into the world, even in a small, silly way. That really helped me find my confidence and what I was meant to do. And I've been trying to reflect on those early days of Dope Kitchen when the growth and the messages and the, meaningful comments that I'd get on my videos. I try to reflect on how much that has changed my life because I don't want to get to a point where I'm taking any of it for granted. And I have had some struggles recently with wanting to quit and wanting to just give up. Like it gets a little more terrifying with each like 10,000 followers I get. And with each video that goes viral, it gets a little bit more terrifying because when I have a smaller audience, I might have like 0.05% of negative comments, and that might translate to, I can't do math that fast in my head, but only a handful of people. But with every, 100,000 followers, that small percentage turns into a larger amount of people. And sometimes it's the negative comments that make me want to quit. No matter how many times I try to convince myself that 99.9% of the messages and comments I get are very positive, and the one negative comment I get a week is just not enough for me to throw in the towel. I have to actively like convince myself that everything's fine every time I read one negative comment because it's the hundreds of thousands of like wonderful people and beautiful messages that I've received that have just totally changed my life.
That is awesome. I just want to mention, because this is something that dawned on me early on as we were getting a lot of hate, because we post a lot of things that aren't necessarily, I guess, popular with people, is that as much as there are nice comments, most people who agree with what you're doing, most people who like what you're doing, just hit the like button and then move on with their life. It's the people who are really pissed off and bitter that sit down and want to like self-soothe and self-validate through the comments section. And so it's so difficult because you can't even say like, oh, it seems like an even spread between, positive and negative comments. It's like you're forgetting all of those hundreds and thousands of people who just liked it, and didn't have the time or take the time to go, you are awesome. They just liked it and letting you know. So that kind of helps as well. And from my side, and this is just something that I would recommend, fuck with them a little. It's a lot of fun. It's satisfying in a lot of ways because I mean they're going out of their way to just spew shit out into the world. And since you're there and you know very well, I mean, some of the best lessons you've ever learned in your life were at the hands of somebody who just calls you out on your shit, and you didn't like them for it. They were not your friend at that time, but in hindsight you're like, thank God that person did that. And so I enjoy being that brick wall for people. It's something that I take a lot of pleasure in because I look at it as creating a ripple, because not all positive ripples come across as positive ripples. There's a mentality where everything is viewed as negative. I have no control over that, and neither do you. All right. So the only thing you can do is make ripples. And if we have no control over those ripples, then the only thing we can do is gauge it based on how authentic we're being. Right. The authenticity is what determines the quality of the ripple, in my opinion. It's not about doing it the right way or the wrong way, but actually just genuinely being yourself, and then let the cards play out, let the dice fall, because you'll never know and you'll never have control, but there are people that are inspired by what you're doing.
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. And we are certainly two of those people, because it's just fucking fun when you're, especially when you're more willing to be yourself, like to see people being themselves, like when you're more relaxed to see people just relaxing and like fucking laughing. It's fucking awesome. Like I just love seeing that in itself. And so I don't know if these are more recent or it's just I've only seen them more recently, but your mom has been in a couple of your videos. I think I remembered hearing at some point that like part of the reason you avoided cannabis in college was family related, possibly, but it seems like you and your mom have a really cool relationship. And I'm assuming she's super high with you on the video, unless she's just like chill as fuck and loosey goosey all the
She's
time.
always
But
loosey goosey, but she doesn't like consume cannabis much on her own. It's mostly a treat whenever I come home. But she's fucking hilarious, and she's where I get my sense of humor from. A lot of my mannerisms are the same as hers. And people love her every time she's in a video. So I always get excited whenever I go home to visit and get to make some content with my mom.
that's fucking incredible. So I'm curious about that relationship, is if that's been something like she's in regards to cannabis or like just in general, people in your life, friends, have you seen that shift or change? If that's something that you know, maybe spend time pushing on or like trying to convince people. Like I've spent plenty of time trying to do that. And I've realized like the more I just chill the fuck out and not try and convince people, the more people are, you know, gravitate a little bit more towards it. So I'm curious your relationship just like with your family specifically in cannabis and just people in general.
Yeah, it was hard at first when I hit 100,000 followers on TikTok. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. I had to like tell my family what was going on the internet with me, and that was difficult because my dad had always been very anti-drug, any sort of drug. So the fact that I was consuming cannabis on the internet for an audience of a lot of people, it was hard for him to understand, and there were definitely some arguments at the beginning there, but I've watched my dad really loosen his stance over the years, and it's at the point where, like, if my mom offers him a little piece of candy at the end of the day, he'll gladly take it, and he loosens up a little bit and has some fun. So it's been really cool to see that shift in him. um it's been pretty awesome to witness, and my mom is always someone that I've been able to, like, be myself in front of, and she's always, followed my personal Instagram account, and I stopped giving a fuck about what I was posting about my life on Instagram a very long time ago. So, my mom has always seen that I have been a cannabis consumer even before Dope Kitchen started, and she was in full support of it. She thought it was hilarious when I started, so I didn't have any issues with my mom. But I mean, my friends are cool. Like, I don't really have a ton of friends who are as into cannabis as I am. My girlfriend is a bigger stoner than I am, which is great. And I have a lot of other friends that I've met in the cannabis industry over the last few years because of Dope Kitchen, who have just been really awesome additions to my life. But I had full support of pretty much all of my friends whenever I started consuming weed and making content with weed undertones, so it's been fine. It's been good.
That's fucking awesome. I love to hear that. And just to hear like how it's reflected and sort of reverberated throughout your life. Like I won't get into too many details about my parents, but like very, very similar sort of vibes. And it's cool to see, and just like the willingness to in yourself relax or not try to push on people. Like I've definitely found that in my life, when the more I try to push someone in a certain direction or try and change someone, it's really just like oftentimes a part of myself that's being reflected back to me that I'm like not willing to look at or focus on as much, or not be as willing to see, I guess. So it's cool to see then the impacts, especially in a world where it's like, you know, we're in the process of a big sort of shift, I think, in mentality in general, and people just being a little bit more relaxed. And we see it symbolically, I think, through the substances we consume, like alcohol. Like I drank a fuckload in college. Like it was very much a part of our
Same.
culture. And I was, anxious in social situations. So how do you shortcut that? You take 5 shots, and then you're kind of chilling for the most part. And it's like you allow that to kind of do the work for you. And so I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, we talk about stuff like this on the podcast a lot, just how symbolic everything is. And so cannabis, people becoming more okay with cannabis, because cannabis isn't something that necessarily does it for you. Like if you're not willing to relax in the face of uncertainty, letting go, like it'll throw you for a loop. Like you'll not have a great time. But when you are willing to relax, it's actually a super enjoyable experience. So it's not that guarantee, or it's not that like, take this and this guarantees this, because the X factor is us. And that's what I'll deal with in comments sometimes, people just being like, oh, weed makes me anxious or paranoid. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't make other people anxious and paranoid, and it's the same exact strain. So like, is the X factor, is it really the weed doing it, or is it showing you a side of yourself that, you're suppressing, or trying to avoid, or building things on top of, so you don't feel like you feel it as much? And it's like cannabis is just peeling some of that back to be like, all right, how much are you not being yourself in general? Because it kind of shows you yourself in a lot of ways, which at least
And
that's
sometimes it is just science and the way your body reacts to it. But I agree with some of your points about, it could just be the state of mind that you're in. And not being willing to relax and being able to kind of accept the feeling, that's going to send you on a bad trip. Same with mushrooms. Like if you take mushrooms and you're not in the right state of mind, um, it's not going to be fun.
Exactly. Actually, it's funny because Andrew and I were talking about getting high when we first started doing the episode, and he was like, what do you do with a bad trip? And I admitted I don't necessarily have bad trips. Like the uncomfortable trips are where I think I'm doing the work. Like when I'm feeling super awkward and terrified and panicky and nervous and anxious, I'm like, oh, we're getting to some good shit now, right? Because that's where you're facing it. That's where you're like, okay, I got to breathe through this. I just got to remember, I don't know. And that's the funny thing about uncertainty, is that as much as it can be terrifying, it's also freeing, right? Because so many of our fears are based on false assumptions. And to recognize that you don't know puts you right back at square one, where you're back here, where you actually have influence, because this is where change happens, right? It's just so hard to recognize that you can let go. You can let go. It's hard to just let yourself let go, because you want so badly to know everything's going to be okay. I deal with this all the time. And the only difference now is I've learned through ridiculous amounts of attempts at control in my life, even just a little bit of like, well, maybe a little bit of control. And there's always this consequence in that I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking I know the right answer. I suddenly have expectations and frustrations, and I have conflict, and I'm threatened by things that aren't going the way that I want. And there is this whole world of thought that goes with thinking I know the right way. And yet here I am, a being with numerous different parts that are all working together intelligently, doubting the fact that I'm intelligence in motion, that we're always intelligence in motion. Isn't that funny that we'll have a conversation, we'll say something, and then after we've said something insightful, we'll go, hey, that was pretty good. And almost as if it wasn't until we went, aha, I've recognized that it made a difference, but it came out of us, which means it was in there. It's just that we doubt that. We doubt that we're going to continue to make choices with sensitivity and awareness and clarity in the same way that you have to get here 4 years in a dope kitchen. And isn't that funny, is that you've been doing it this whole time? It's just when you think about it, it seems like this huge weight. And so one thing I've always said is keep it light. And I what I mean by that is just don't overcommit to anything. And what you'll find is that day by day, your life will twist and weave and inspire others without you even trying. And that's the last thing I'm going to say regarding the comments section, is as much as it's nice to get feedback from people, that's not why you're doing it. You're always building on your relationship with yourself. Other people are just giving you an environment to do that to a greater degree. And I'm excited that that is the case, because we're all benefiting from it. That said, because we're going to wrap up here fairly shortly. I've been smoking weed for a long time, and there are certain flavors that I really enjoy when I'm very high. One of them is extra old cheddar cheese. And I've recommended this to people, and people who haven't tried it are like, what the fuck is he going on about? And then when they try it, they're like, okay, I see what you said there. Since this is something that you do very often, what would you say are, say, your top 3 or top 5 flavors and or meals for being high?
Flavors or meals for being high? Oh, um, I haven't even thought about my answers to this question before. I would say instead of flavors, I do like textures. I like having a variety of textures in my mouth. So something that's maybe soft and chewy paired with something really crunchy. I love the sensory experience in my mouth. But I guess when it comes to flavors or meals, I love things that are easy to make but have a ton of flavor, which is why I tend to lean on meatballs often for my stoned recipes. Super easy to make. You just throw some ground beef or whatever meat you have in a bowl with some spices and other things, and you get this magical little ball full of flavor. And then you can pair it with so many things. So I've made like a Thai curry risotto before with meatballs. That was fucking phenomenal because it was a fusion of different cultures in one dish. Um, and then I just like a meatball sandwich, you know, a classic meatball sub with some melted provolone in there. You get so many textures and it's handheld. Pretty fucking awesome.
That's
Wow.
amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm going to pass this to Andrew, but I want to say very quickly that I hope at some point you can join us at one of our retreats and you can cook high with us. We have mini retreats and major retreats. Our mini retreats, we all cook together, which is a lot of fun, especially when you're all high and microdosing on mushrooms. And then on the 9-day retreats, we have a chef. So it'd be great to discuss some recipes and meals with you about that as well. I think you would really enjoy the community as a whole. Dualistic Unity, our podcast, is very much based on the work that we do on cannabis, that we can continue to do when we're sober, recognizing that we don't know, we can relax. It's going to be okay. We can trust ourselves and things are going to work out. So I know the community is going to love this episode. I encourage you to check out the podcast and join us at one of our events if you ever can. But I'm going to pass this to Andrew. I just wanted to say again, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Hell yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Nicole, it's been fucking awesome. I was very excited for this episode for a while, and glad we were able to finally make it happen because yeah, it's fun to, there's a lot more to cannabis than just cannabis and getting high, and there's whole, you know, human experiences that we're all going through, and so it's been a pleasure getting to know a little bit more about your experience, and you got me thinking now of the texture thing got me. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, textures are a little different. I'm thinking like a peanut butter pretzel ice cream or something. I'm like, oh
Mm,
wow, there's a lot of different textures there.
yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So that might be mine, at least for now. But yeah, it's been a blast chatting, Nicole, and I look forward to our next chat. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. This was great. I am gonna go journal about this now, probably. It was a wonderful conversation with you both.
We look forward to having you on again. Just a quick shout out to our listener. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Awesome. That was great.
Thanks. This was fun.